On this week's show, Megan and Konrad get the bejeezus scared out of them by climate activist Izzy Choksey. The major German parties have given up on avoiding ecological catastrophe, so either vote for the nerds who've done the homework or hope you're not going to live to see 2040. Luckily, we have weird fizzy Green Botanical Rum to hand, because despair is never the answer. Onward!
It is time for Megan's Megacan. I'm Megan. I'm here with ex-Berliner Magazine and Konrad Werner. Hi, Konrad.
Hello.
And we've got the weird delay again, which means Konrad and I are sharing a mic because we have the lovely Izzy Choksey. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very, very glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're very excited. You have the awesome job title of being a professional climate activist.
Yes.
Very cool. And you also have a podcast.
I do. It's called Sisteronics. And yeah, you should look it up if you want to hear about modern politics and the world through a feminist lens.
That sounds excellent. That's pretty much what I listen to. That sounds great. This is Megan's Megacan. So we have to drink some Megacans. What do you know about Megacans, Izzy?
Basically nothing,
Oh my goodness.
apart from the fact that they got really famous after Fleabag. Is that
Did
right?
they?
Yeah, like the gin tonic in a can, the G&T in a can.
Yes.
After the priests and Fleabag like drink it in the church.
I started watching Fleabag and I thought I didn't like Fleabag, and then I started in the lockdown, and then they must have opened the pubs because I've stopped. I have. That is what happened.
Yeah, you need to catch up because it's. I mean, for me, it's some of the best TV I've ever seen in my life. So
probably the best thing about Germany is that the reason they're called Megacans here is because they're a full 10% as opposed.
Wow.
So, and exciting news, I think I have a new one today. This is a Havana Club, so we're going to be drinking rum at 7 p.m. on a Friday, which can only go well.
One way.
Do you want to say something, Konrad? You're shuffling. You're silently. Was it just you wanted the mega, or did you want the microphone?
There's two reasons. I wanted to have a look at what it said on it.
Right, you say what you see there. You hold that and describe the can. I'm going to give one to...
It's called Verdi
Thank you.
and Tonic, infused with botanicals.
I will give points to anyone who can tell me what Verdi is.
Green?
Yeah, yes. But, yeah.
In Italian,
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Yes, I was obviously... Yeah, in the context of a Megacan, what the fuck does it mean?
It's like rosemary and thyme and lemon and
trying
orange.
to just get... Like Havana Club trying to sidle in on the fancy gin market.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
El Ron de Cuba.
It's weird, yeah. It sounds like it's going to be taste of grass or something.
Well, as long as it doesn't taste of actual grass, like that disgusting cannabis drink you made me drink last week.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
It was really bad. Okay, all right. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Now, Izzy, don't smell it ever.
Okay.
And
Literally, like as I'm like putting it under my nose.
don't do that with the Megacan. It's a bit like, I think there's like toxic fumes rise to the surface, so you have to like let it breathe a bit. And then the first sip is always just a challenge. You just have to get through. Oh, that's not bad.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's nice.
Oh, good Jesus.
It's an aftertaste. There's an aftertaste.
Yeah, I think
That's
it's
just-
pretty good, this one.
It's nice though when you think, oh, gin and tonic, and then the aftertaste just goes, no, rum. In a slightly concerning way. All right. I'm very tired.
It's got enough sugar though
Oh.
to be tasty.
This is the problem with the Megacans. I think I definitely have not necessarily like a drinking, I just have a Megacan problem. Like there's sometimes I don't want to drink, I'm like, I need a Megacan. And I think it is the sugar, actually. It's the sugar booze combination. Anyway.
Well, sugar's just way more efficient at doing all the things you want it to do. You know,
Yes.
it's going to like get to your head quicker. It's going to get in your blood faster. It's going to
This is very
metabolize
true.
faster. And then suddenly you're absolutely pissed. It's like the Caipirinhas.
You've just described a Megacan. You're on the right page, Izzy.
I think I'm in the right room.
Why don't you tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I am a professional climate activist. I've been doing that for about a year. Beforehand, before the pandemic, I was working as a tour guide in Berlin for about 5 years. But yeah, so as a professional climate activist, I work for an organisation based here in Germany, and we campaign towards financial institutions. So we talk to financial institutions about how they can better protect our climate by excluding coal, oil and gas from their portfolios, or if it's insurance companies, stopping underwriting coal, oil and gas, or stopping underwriting or investing in weapons, illegal weapons, and also anything that's labelled as a human rights abuse as well. So trying to improve their investments and stop underwriting the most horrific parts of our society and our economy.
So you're talking to people with quite a lot of agency about why they should be decent human beings.
Yeah, it's like talking to a throttling train that's going in one direction, and that direction is really shit, and we're like standing on the platform as it's hurtling past, being like waving our little banners and saying, could you just not go in that direction? And yeah, it has I don't know, I think like activism has a massive role in society, and a healthy civil society is one that can really be transformational in any society, and one that looks towards obviously the private market as we do, but also towards government as well. Healthy civil societies definitely hold other aspects, more powerful aspects of society to account. So there's always a role for a civil society organisation, in my view. But yes, sometimes it does feel like, banging your head against a brick wall, because ultimately, yeah, I think we all know about financial institutions. They go where there is profit, and currently we do live in a fossil fuel.
They love money. They absolutely love it.
I mean, it's the goal.
Recently, for the election campaign, you've been slightly helping out with a new political party, is that right?
Yeah, so I've been really interested by the work of Klimaliste and their election campaign. I have been wanting to kind of get more involved with them. And Klimaliste is on the more radical, progressive left end of the climate movement and also the climate political world. And they're sort of trying to be the progressive voice, pushing parties like the Greens and Die Linke in a more climate radical direction. Okay.
And when did they start?
They started in 2020, so the beginning of 2020, January 2020, just before the pandemic.
Great time to start any project.
Okay. Yeah. And who are they?
They're mainly like academics, academics, scientists, also like tech startup people. So people from the green tech startup world have been massively influential within the Klimaliste group. So the top candidate for Klimaliste, for instance, Sophia Lisa Hinnon, she was or is a tech entrepreneur. She's very interested in things like, what's that thing that like Bitcoin is based on? Blockchain. So she's like
I barely know what Bitcoin
is. she's like a blockchain entrepreneur, and she's also like really involved in a lot of like green tech startups in Berlin. And she founded this party basically in early 2020 to be a progressive movement party, to say that the current parties that we have, the mainstream parties that we have, are not doing enough, and we can't wait for them to wake up and recognize how insanely close the climate crisis is, how it's already here, and how we have very little time to do anything about it.
Right, so this is the big question. As someone who is interested and cares about the climate, like most of the German electorate, so in all the polls it says the number one issue is always climate and the environment, saying this is the most important thing in this election. Why wouldn't I vote for the Green Party? Why would I vote for the Klimaliste instead?
So climate is going to be something that is part of our electoral landscape for the rest of our lives. So that means that climate is going to be the biggest issue that we face forever going forward in our lifetimes. It's not going to go away. And that means that every single party has to respond to the climate crisis. You can't just have one party that you vote for if you care about the climate. If you care about the climate, but you want to do something about it in a market driven way, then you would vote for the CDU. right? If you care about the climate, but you believe in transformational abilities of the government, you would vote for Die Linke. If you care about the climate, but you believe that you can invest your way out of this crisis, you vote for the Greens. And if you don't believe that any of these parties have a sufficient platform to combat the climate crisis, you vote for a party like Klimaliste. And it's basically saying that conventional parties just don't have the answers. So sort of saying, I care about the climate, so why shouldn't I vote for the Greens, is like saying, well, I care about human beings, so why shouldn't I vote for the CDU or something like that? You know, it's like all parties have to have a climate platform now, and all of them do. It's just the way that we're going to deal with these issues is very different depending on the different parties.
Okay, and am I right? The Klimaliste isn't standing in the federal election; it's only in the Berlin state election.
They are standing on the federal platform as well. Okay. Yeah, but it's mainly like a Berlin-driven election platform. Yeah. So you sent me an article today that I thought was really shocking in a way, because it pointed out that all of the main political parties, they all say in their election manifesto, we believe in the 1.5 degree target, which is the Paris climate target. And yet all the plans in their manifestos won't reach that target, and some of them won't reach by a lot more than others. So the FDP is basically climate suicide, right? I mean, the FDP, they want to be climate neutral by 2050, and it goes down, all the way down. I mean, the AFD don't count anyway because they don't believe it's happening. They're like on a different planet.
Oh, that they were.
And then it goes down to the SPD and the CDU. They want to be climate neutral by 2045. The Greens want to be climate neutral by 2041, and the Linke by 2035. So the Linke actually have the most ambitious climate targets. I think that's like a pretty significant fact that it doesn't seem to be reported very often.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, you know, as a political party, you have to sort of make a decision on how much you want to tell people. And I think a lot of financial institutions, the ones that I work with, for instance, and also we get, for instance, like memos from fossil fuel companies as well that are like leaked internal documents where they say basically 1.5 ain't gonna happen. Like, we just have to accept that. And we've just got to accept that 2 degrees is probably a much more likely target. And that's the world in which we're going to live, and just get over it. And I think to some extent, all of the major political parties, definitely CDU, FDP, definitely, SPD to some extent, you know, their voters are older. Their voters are probably not going to see the worst effects of the climate crisis. And for them, it's really a sort of case of like, well, there ain't that much we can do. So yes, we'll say 1.5. No one really knows how to really get there. Like, we don't have that many like concrete policy demands that have been made by bodies like the IPCC, for instance. They just say reduce emissions. So political parties can interpret that however they want. And I think that you see that with the climate plans, you know. When a political party says we can be net zero by 2050, it's basically just saying we're going to get to 2 degrees, probably 3 degrees, and you've just got to deal with that. And we ain't going to be around when that happens, so we don't really give a shit. You know, we don't really care. And when you see climate plans, for instance, with the Greens of 2041 of climate neutral by 2041, they do want to phase out coal by 2030. All right, that's one thing that I will put the Greens at. They want to change. We currently have a phase out plan for coal, which is 2038, which is far, far, far too late. Coal is by far and away the most polluting of all the fossil fuels. So they want to do a phase out date by 2030, but they're happy for gas, for instance, to be a replacement for coal until we have a hydrogen ready economy. And that hydrogen ready economy will most likely also have gas as a large part of it as well. So that's why they say this 2041 phase out date, because they're really relying on, you know, essentially us having the same quality of life, the same standard of life, the same access to consumerables, the same access to, you know, this endless supply of consumer goods that we get given, this endless ability to like spend money and use our electricity and do all the things that we want to do, because they're not the party of, you know, Ausschlusskriterium. They don't want to exclude anything. They want to like allow us to have this like amazing life that we have without giving anything up. But that's simply not going to be the case. So the more ambitious your climate plan, the more you're actually having to say to the public, you're going to have to give some stuff up in order for us to get to 1.5. But the thing that you won't be giving up is your ability to fucking survive, which is what the CDU and the FDP are asking us to give up, but no one quite realises it.
Yeah, because that's a relatively bleak thing to say, but I think definitely that seems to be the sort of Greens message of like, everyone can vote for us and it's all going to be like, we can all just keep going and we'll be a bit greener and it'll be fine. And I think that is becoming less and less kind of credible in a way. So what attracted you then to when you like saw Klimaliste and what they were up to, and like what's different about what they're saying?
So they're like the nerds in the classroom. Like if you were in a university seminar room, they would be like the two people who have like actually read the text. You know, everyone else
should be voting for these people, for the love of God.
Like everyone else is like blagging their way through. Like, yeah, of course I read Moby Dick. Like, is it a fish? And they would be like, no, actually it's a whale, and it's actually a metaphor for like slavery. So they are the ones who have done their research. They've done a huge amount of preparation.
Don't they have this enormous kind of Klima plan, like 800 page
300 pages
behemoth of like
300 pages, and
good Lord,
you can actually have it spoken to you in English and German, so they've actually transcribed it into an audiobook.
By one of the nerds.
Of course they have. That's amazing.
By the nerds.
That might actually be quite good.
It's a really accessible platform. You can read it in English, or you can read it in German, and you can also listen to it as well in English and German, which I think is like a really accessible way to like present your ideas. And it's quite nerdy. Like a lot of it's really nerdy. They utilize current legislation that we already have in Berlin, and also say how we can extend certain laws that we already have, or build on certain laws that we already have in place in order to strengthen this ability, or strengthen the mobilizing effort of the Berlin government to create a climate neutral city by 2030. So it's a really ambitious plan. They use things like, for instance, they have this concept of Vision Zero, which actually was an initiative that was started in 2017. And the idea is that we completely eradicate pedestrian deaths inside of the city centre of Berlin. So that means eradicating people who die from bike accidents and also pedestrian accidents, pedestrians being run over by cars. So there's lots of different ways that people have proposed to do this, but we're currently not really enacting any of them. We have this safe streets policy in Berlin where they want to create extremely safe pedestrian crossings on every single street, but currently we're not doing that. You know, like there's not any funding going into it, and there's even
that's interesting.
These efforts by local communities to enact these reforms that can get thwarted by the local governments. So Vision Zero is a policy that they want to, that Klimaliste have taken up. They say, okay, we've already voted this in once. We've already created this initiative. Let's use it. And let's use it to create completely safe streets. So coming up with the ideas of, not coming up with the ideas, but utilizing the ideas of a city centre free of cars. Mm-hmm. So looking at the Friedrichstrasse and how much of a success that has been over the last year in creating this place where people can go and hang out, and bikers can finally feel what it's like to like bike down a street without constantly being terrified that you're going to be run over by a car. Mm-hmm. So creating like a city centre that is free from traffic, free from cars, making sure that buses and trains and the U-Bahn and the S-Bahn are coming more frequently and with cheaper fares, so that it's making public transport really accessible and available for every single person, making sure that every single station has disabled access so that people can come without any barriers whatsoever to public transport, and also creating a bike system using the bike lanes that are already there, but also extending that massively, as we saw partly in the lockdown, but without enough oomph from the current government that we have, and based on these safety regulations that have been created by Berlin's Bike Safety Association. So really utilizing the expertise that we currently have, the legislation that we currently have, and saying, let's use this as a mobilizing force to rank up, so like to really crank up the efforts to create a net zero, livable, extremely pleasant place to live that doesn't have smog in the city centre, that doesn't have pollution in the city centre, that is accessible for all pedestrians, all people who want to access it through public transport, and also through bike lanes and so forth. So that's just one element, bouncing off of this idea that has already been knocking around for years in Berlin and saying, let's use that and let's really work on it and let's really create it into a proper citywide vision.
One other question. Aren't you worried, because obviously we're in an emergency situation, aren't you worried that you're going to be taking away votes from the Greens if we vote for the Klimaliste?
We're in an emergency that the Greens are not going to solve. So that's the first thing I would say. So I would say that the Greens are not adequate in their policies currently. I won't be voting for them on a city level. I'll be splitting my vote between Klimaliste and Die Linke, direct candidate Die Linke, and overall candidate. So the second pick that you have, the overall listing will go to Klimaliste. That's just me. They've actually just published polling that came from an independent organization in Berlin, an independent polling organization called the Umfrage Institut CW, that showed that Klimaliste is not actually taking votes from Greens. Oh. So people who would have voted for Green and now want to vote for Klimaliste are a very low third in terms of the kind of voters that are voting for Klimaliste. Mm-hmm. So a large section of that are Sonstiger voters, so voters who will usually go for small parties. So they're taking up, a large proportion of their voters are people who would vote for small parties, a lot of which would never have gotten in to, through the 5% rule. So people are congregating around this party from smaller parties and saying, actually, this is someone, or this is a group that we could actually maybe get into the parliament. And the second largest group is Die Linke. And I think that shows, Die Linke is a party that believes in the transformational capacity of government. It doesn't shy away from using government as a forceful instrument in society. And Klimaliste, the kind of things that they're proposing would require transformational government. I think a lot of Green voters can also be government skeptic. Mm-hmm. I think as a Green voter, you don't have to believe that government is the answer. You can be someone who believes that financial institutions changing their ESG policies is the answer, or people changing their electricity, or all of these little teeny tiny things that we can do as a society and we can do as individuals. Like, they don't necessarily question the merits of neoliberalism. They don't question the merits of capitalism in solving this crisis. Whereas Klimaliste is saying, we're in a crisis. Let's use the tools that we have. Whereas the Greens are saying, let's kind of try and up the tools that we currently use in our capitalistic system. Mm. So I think it makes a lot of sense that actually the people who are more convinced by Klimaliste are people who genuinely do believe in a transformational capacity of government.
Yeah. I'm in.
You're
are you standing, already? Izzy? I will 100% vote for you.
Give
My
me 5
Lord.
years.
I don't know. I was just excited, so I took the microphone. You can have it back. How's everyone's Megacan? You do have to keep drinking. Okay. That's the other thing, Izzy, because otherwise you're gonna make.
I just dripped it onto my lap.
That's fine.
It's one sip in.
Megacan experience.
You sent us these notes before, which was really useful because now we're like all prepared and we know what we're all going to say. But
I don't.
But
I do. I'm looking.
There's also an infographic.
You even sent us
I put an infographic.
Yeah, it's amazing. So this is interesting because Megan looked at your notes and she was glancing at them and she said, "Ooh, it says here Berlin will have the same weather as Nice in a few years' time. That sounds nice."
Nice.
Throwing me under the bus there.
So, like, what's so bad about Nice?
What is so bad about Nice?
Actually, I did, just that's a great segue. I did my Erasmus year in Nice, and its name is a lie. It's a shithole.
It's gotten better, actually, because they planted a bunch of trees in the city centre.
It's probably still filled with horrible men who will shout the most appalling things at you in the street if you're like 20 years old. However, but why is it bad if we get hit this? What happens? Is that 1.5?
Yeah.
Berlin becomes...
We're going to. It's not a question. It's going to happen. 1.5 is baked in.
So what are we preparing
ourselves?
Absolutely
Absolutely baked in.
Yeah. Okay.
About 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Early 2030s, according to the recent IPCC report that came out in August.
The one that's really scary, and I
Really
haven't been able to
scary.
read it yet.
They always are, but it's this one's
I'm like,
really
someday
like,
I'll do that. Oh.
So yeah, 1.5 is baked in, and it's we're at 1.1 now, and we see where we are, right? We have extreme weather events that are happening on a fairly regular basis with large death tolls that we're not really used to. Flooding, for instance, is like becoming an annual massive event that is starting to really like take up a lot of news time and take up a lot of aid dollars, and it's going to cost us a huge amount of money over the next like 10, 15, 20 years. And do you know who's not going to pay for that? Insurance companies. So we are, as taxpayers, going to take on a huge amount of the cost of these kind of events. And when you know this report that I read about the climate of Berlin, and it's the climate, not the weather, we're going to have the climate of Nice, right, in a temperate...
Sorry, just explain to me what the difference between climate and weather is, because I'm confused.
Climate is long-term, weather is short-term. I think that's the easiest way of...
Okay.
I mean, like, I'm not a scientist.
So that's like whenever sort of like AfD politicians come in with snowballs, being like, oh, look, what about climate change? They're just talking about weather.
Yeah, climate is long-term and weather is like short-term. So we're going to have the climate of Nice, which means that overall during the year, we're going to have a similar quantity of above 30-degree days. We're going to have a similar quantity of frost days, so 1 or 2 a year. We're going to have less and less snowfall, obviously, which we're already experiencing now. We're going to have much warmer, much rainier winters, and we're going to have much, much, much hotter summers. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have the same weather. So we live in an area that's surrounded by a lot of marshland, which means that when we get hot days, we often get very, very big thunderstorms that happen straight away, right? Because we live in this area that has a lot of marshland. You know, hot, it goes up into the atmosphere, gets cloudy, and then poof, rains down. So when you have hot air, it can actually hold a lot more moisture than colder air, or air that's slightly colder, and that goes up by a certain amount with every single degree.
So we're going to be looking at flooding then?
Massive amounts more rainfall, and rainfall that's not spread out, that obviously you could handle, or like the ecosystem could handle. Like we're going to be talking about like massive amounts of flooding and really heavy rainfall. And because Berlin's so flat, and it also has a lot of these marshes as well, you can imagine that it will be okay. But at the same time, like there's a certain point where the underwater systems will break, U-Bahn stations will start to flood. You know, Berlin's got an extremely high water table. That could start affecting, you know, the way in which we live, the ability that we have to have electricity pass under us, and, you know, like old school plumbing systems that have lasted for 120 years will start collapsing because of the amount of water that is surrounding them in the water table in these very short, sharp bursts.
Yeah.
So just to plug Klimaliste one more time, they have this concept of the sponge city. So the sponge city is this idea that you can create a city that is able to adapt to heavy, sustained rainfall during summer months. And the way you do that is by removing a huge amount of concrete, so unlocking the soil underneath and replacing what would have been concrete pathways, parking spaces for cars, for instance, with avenues that have on one side trees, places to sit, places to eat, places to drink, and bike lanes and, you know, bike parking places and so forth. And then only on the other side of the street, you have a small area that is given over to cars. So it's basically taking over the streets and taking back the streets for the people that live there rather than the cars that are parked there. And that might sound a little bit exclusionary, especially to people who do require vehicles for going to work and so forth. But then there's another aspect of the Klimaliste plan, which is to say, we understand that this is actually quite an exclusionary policy that favors people who are wealthy enough to use public transport, or, you know, wealthy enough to have maybe home-based jobs or jobs that are accessible via public transport. So to like limit people's ability to keep a car based on need. If you need a car in the city centre, okay, fine. If you don't, park it outside. Make it a special treat to use your car. don't use it for short trips inside of a city centre. You know, this idea that you should somehow be able to access a car constantly is something that, as a city that needs to adapt to climate change, we can't have those luxuries anymore. And to be honest, I think it's more of a luxury to have a really amazing, durable, accessible public transport
to not
system.
be under fucking water. Let's
And
be
that-
clear.
yeah.
That's a top. God, I have to leave my flats on the Ardgashaw. I'm fucked. Gonna have to move in here, Konrad.
What if the ground floor goes like they all go, don't they? So
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. I could just kind of.
I'm going to buy a dinghy and just float off my balcony. Anyway, I think that's a dream I once had. Right.
definitely after a Megacan.
Yeah.
Right. So just to be clear, so that's 1.5 degrees. That is definitely going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years, right?
Yeah.
So what happens at 2 degrees? Which was what is probably going to happen if any of the major parties get into power.
Okay, just to paint a picture for you in Brandenburg, we're talking about ecosystem collapse. So a lot of
That
it's
doesn't
about
sound good.
70% of trees in Berlin and Brandenburg area will struggle to survive on 1.5 degrees. You have these extreme heat and wet weather and all of these kind of extreme weather events that are going to occur at 1.5 degrees are going to make it very difficult for trees to survive. We're already in a situation of Waldsterben. So we're going through the largest die out of natural forest in Germany since the 1980s. I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of Waldsterben, but it's like this moment in the 1980s where fuckloads of trees were dying in Germany, and it became a huge political issue because a lot of protesters, and it was one of the major reasons why the Green Party started to become an extremely important political force in people's lives. They weren't just about anti-nuclear, they were also about the fact that these trees were just dying in their thousands and millions all over Germany. And they figured out eventually that it was the lead inside of petrol that was doing it in these cars. So it was, lead poisoning was getting into the trees, and that's where we had the concept of unleaded petrol. So unleaded petrol came from this movement of activists who started to, use science and figured out that it was this lead inside of the petrol that was going into fumes, creating pollution, acid rain falling on trees and murdering them. Killing them. So there was a massive die out of trees, and Germany's forests have still not recovered from the 1980s. And we are going through the largest die out since the 1980s currently at the moment. And it's to do with climate change. It's to do with less access to water, less access to resources that they had before. 1.5 degrees is going to make it much harder, and 70% of the trees in our area are going to find it hard to survive. They're going to struggle. 2 degrees, they're going to die. So it's this thing of we're going to be a desert. I don't know if any of you spend any time at Hassenheide. Every year it gets desertified. And there are efforts during the wintertime to replant some of the grasses and so forth. But it's getting harder and harder to sustain Hassenheide as a viable grassland because the grasses cannot cope with the number of hot days that we have during our summer and the lack of consistent rain. This year has been slightly different. We have had a lot of rain, so a lot of the parks are doing a lot better than they were, for instance, last year. But we're gonna have this inability of the ecosystems to really survive. So that's one thing. We also feed ourselves quite well in Berlin. So your cucumbers and so forth that you get from Spreewald, and a lot of our agricultural products do actually come from the Brandenburg area. We do feed ourselves quite well from Brandenburg. We won't be able to do that anymore. We will become a city almost completely reliant on imports of vegetables, fruits and so forth, which makes us extremely vulnerable to famines that happen elsewhere. If we're getting all of our fruits and vegetables from Spain and there happens to be a famine because of drought that happens in Spain, which is much more likely than it will happen here, then we're fucked. So 2 degrees is a very scary world in which there is a lot of movement of people from one place to another because they can no longer live in their places anymore. They can no longer survive without water, without food, without the ability to grow crops or live through extreme heat of above 40 degrees for 10, 15, 20 days in a row. So there's going to be a huge amount of movement of people And movement of people, mass migrations, tend to cause war. So it's going to be a world of war and famine and chaos, and absolutely not a fucking chance that democracy will survive for very long. On a political on a political level, I mean, yeah, there's not many forms of government that operate well in that environment, and the only one that tends to operate well is totalitarianism. So yeah, like it's.
And how likely is 2 degrees? I mean, when is this likely to happen?
Oh, on our current path, we're aiming for 3.6
this century.
Oh yeah.
And 2 degrees, like by 2050 or so.
Easy. This is why the kids in front of the Bundestag right now, you know, I don't know if you've seen.
Strike,
yeah, the hunger strikers.
What?
There are hunger strikers in front of the Kanzlerei at the moment. You know, they're standing in front of, or they're camping in front of Angela Merkel's chancellery. So, I mean, they're saying, look, yeah, we're starving ourselves today, but you're starving us of a future. You know, famines in Europe in 20 years' time will be a thing that we have to live through. Even at 1.5 degrees, it's going to be something that happens every 5 years. So at 2 degrees, it's going to be something that happens most years. This, you know, so when we say the CDU and the FDP are maybe not infringing on your current liberties, they're infringing on your ability to survive in the future. The Greens, by accepting that capitalism somehow needs to work out its own way of dealing with this, and yes, we can use government to enforce market solutions like solar and wind, but not necessarily use them to completely regulate our economy in a way that it needs to be regulated and enforce those regulations to the degree that they need to be enforced. By saying that, I think they're also giving up on 1.5. And I think it's only really parties like Klimaliste and Die Linke, to some extent. I think Die Linke even also maybe doesn't have a full climate plan that is going to completely, you know, get Germany ready for 1.5. But I think, you know, we have to accept that parties like Klimaliste are raising the alarm on the political level. And we can no longer acquiesce to the wishes of the maybe older, more traditional conservative voters to just have business as usual, because their business has brought us to a crisis that we're currently living through, and one that will take away our ability to function as a civilization in the future.
You mentioned at the beginning that the secretly a lot of these businesses know this is going to happen, right? They're kind of sharing things saying like 1.5 is not going to happen. We're going to get, at least it's going to be 2 degrees. And they must have plans, right? They must have plans for this. If they know that it's going to be a lot worse than 1.5, what are the plans? I
don't necessarily think that anyone's planning for 2 degrees, because if they were, they would be too terrified to plan for it. I think, I mean, from my limited experience actually working up close with these kind of institutions, is that they're waiting for government and government's waiting for them. And it's a sort of this standoff of like, they don't want regulation. They lobby against regulation. They lobby as much as they can to prevent more regulation of the financial sector. They do anything they can to prevent that. But at the same time, they're kind of hands up and saying, well, we live in democratic societies that elect these leaders. And who are we to go further than a democratically elected government? Yeah. Which is an understandable point. You can understand that, but it's also bullshit, because on the other side, they're lobbying that same government to say, if you regulate us, we're fucking off to, you know, Ireland, where they have less regulation, or we're fucking off to like Switzerland, or, you know, whatever. They say we're going to take our business elsewhere. And where are they going to take it? In a 2 degree what? The moon? The fucking moon? Like, where are they planning on going? I don't think anyone really knows. It's like a standoff that is currently happening between governments on one side saying, well, our voters don't want this because they're not voting for Green parties. And on the other side, financial institutions saying, we live in democratic societies and we're waiting for governments to do something, but we also don't want governments to regulate us. So it's yeah.
It sounds like we really need to vote some new people into power everywhere. Now, also maybe 15 years ago, but also now.
Well, the difference between 15 years ago and now is that everything has to be quicker and much more extreme than 15 years ago. if there's one brilliant sort of a report that comes out every year called the Production Gap Report, and it says that if we had started doing this in 2000, if we had started doing emissions reductions in 2000s, sizable emissions reductions, we were talking about 3% a year, which is sizable, but it's manageable, and most likely democracy could handle 3% a year. You could do that in a democratic and fair way that was distributed throughout society and not an unfair burden on certain aspects of society. We're now talking about 9% a year reduction by 2030, and even higher reductions, 11 to 14% during the 2030s. It is extreme. That is extreme change.
Yeah.
It will require enormous amount of investment. Not, the stuff that governments can't just come up with by themselves. Entire societies are going to have to shift from one system to another. There is a hopeful aspect to this, which is that I truly do believe that an energy system that is based on renewables is much fairer, is much more decentralized, much more distributed throughout a society, and will give us a lot more agency and power in our lives, and we will be much less vulnerable to being essentially under corporate capture, which we are currently in a situation where very few companies have a huge amount of power over our governments and therefore our societies, and we are unable really to break out from their very firm grip. But with renewables, with solar on everyone's roof, with wind, with geothermal in every building, these are technologies that you can't really centralize to the extent that you can centralize oil or gas. So it's a different world, and it's a world I think is way better, way more fair, way more egalitarian, way more decentralized, with people having power and agency that they never had before, that we haven't had since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So I think that's a hopeful future, but it just has to happen very fast.
Very quickly. Well, this is really needs to be expedited. Well, I think that's lovely. That's, I feel a bit overcome.
Yeah. Take us there.
This is what it was
Had
like.
quite a lot of...
This was what it was like when we went
Yeah,
to dinner.
I can 100% understand why you really wanted to get Izzy on as a guest, and I'm so glad that you did. Right, she was just... Well, yeah.
But, yeah, okay. So how do you cope with this? How do you cope with all this? Like, knowing all this...
That's a good question.
Like,
Is it Megacans?
How come you're not...
So I really need to find a solution that's
How
not
come you're not really depressed?
Because we haven't lost yet. So you can't be, we haven't got to 1.5 yet. There is still a chance, and you've got to do everything before that point. And once we reach that point, 1.6, and once we reach that point, 1.7, once we reach that point, 1.8, well, fuck it, we will win. We will, but we just, we haven't got there yet. So...
Well, one way or another, I guess society will have to change. Either it'll be a big crash, or we'll do it in some kind of organised way.
I think it's more a steady march to totalitarianism, fascist, ethnic, eco-fascism. Because the right do have solutions to this, right? They accept 2 degrees, great, bring it on.
Yeah, there are some climate fascist thinkers, isn't there? There's a few of those type of people.
We're currently living in a world where climate fascists are...
We were being so positive. Fucking hell, what is that sentence that you just said?
It's fine.
Ethnic climate No, absolutely not. No, I did not fucking sanction this bullshit.
It's either that or democracy manages to figure out a way to rapidly transform our societies into ones that can radically reduce emissions and also cope with a world in which we are going to be exposed to much more extreme weather events than we currently are.
Okay.
So, what are we doing? What's your... I'm excited because as a teacher, I'm not allowed to tell people how to vote, but how should people vote, Izzy, in Berlin? Or generally in Germany?
Well, I don't want to like tell people how to vote or anything.
should.
It's kind of up to you, but
100%. Well, you can say what I think you did it all already. Actually.
yeah, I did. I mean, like on the federal level, I'm being much more tactical. So, I mean, I do.
And you get to vote.
I do, because I got my citizenship like 2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah,
like,
for a lot of people, I think
yeah.
it's quite exciting, particularly because I think Brexit sped up that thing. But I think there's a lot of UK people who are voting in their first German election as Germans.
Wow,
it's very exciting.
I mean, so when I did my Einbürgerungstest, this test to get citizenship, there was this woman. I went out to like East Germany, East Brandenburg, out to like the border with Poland, like Frankfurt am Oder, and to get my Einbürgerungstest, because there was no bookings in Berlin. And when I got there, it was like a Volkshochschule, and she clearly didn't have very many people learning. I can't remember what she was teaching. I think she was teaching like Russian or something. And so she did our test, and there was this one British guy who was like a middle-aged British guy, and he came in, and I made a joke. I was like, oh yeah, we're both refugees, Brexit refugees. And he was like, I'm not a refugee. I'm a British man, and I've been here for 25 years. And I was like, oh,
dear fucking Christ.
And he was like laughing throughout his test, being like, oh, I'm so good at this test. And I was like, I was shitting my pants. I was like checking all the questions, reading them 5 times. And the woman kind of saw this, and she found it quite funny. And she checked over my test like after I did it, and she gave me the A-OK, and she was like, yeah, it's fine, you got it. And then we just ended up having like a really long chat. And at one point I kind of said like, I feel weird becoming a German because I don't feel German at all. At all. Want to emphasize that. Still don't feel German. And she said, oh, you don't need to. You're not doing this to be German. You're doing this to stay European.
Yeah.
And I felt that was a really beautiful sentiment.
Nice. Oh, I feel that's cute.
She just gave me that wonderful experience. And so, yeah, I'm not really voting as a German. I'm voting as a European.
There we go. That's nice.
It's not bad. Maybe I'll become German over the years.
Come for the techno, stay for the infrastructure, I think is going to be my Berlin experience, because I just got so frustrated in Northern Ireland. I was like, nothing works here. What do you mean? But anyway, that's all right. Did we get to the end of who are we voting? Why are we?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think in Berlin, there's a few really good progressive choices. I would say if you want to vote Green, vote Green. That's absolutely fine. Like voting Green, voting Linke, voting Klimaliste, we're all on the same fucking side here. We have slightly different solutions, but we're all on the same side. I think what you do with Klimaliste is you add voice to this more really progressive, really like, we have a bunch of tools and we can use them to a massive effect. And so if you're not happy maybe with the government over the last 5 years, and the Red Greens have maybe done some good stuff, but you don't feel that they've gone far enough or utilised the power of government strongly enough, I would vote for Klimaliste in your second vote, because they're not actually putting forward a direct candidate. So your first vote will go to one of the other parties. And I mean, for that, I'm voting Linke, but I know that it's not everyone's cup of tea. So yeah, Green, Linke, Klimaliste, we're all on the same goddamn side.
I actually have a colleague who is a Klimaliste candidate in Schöneberg, and I was texting him just then, and he was like, yeah. I was like, anything you want us to say? And he was like, vote Klimaliste, particularly in the Bezirk. And you can still, because a lot of people listening are not able to vote in anything other than the Bezirk. A lot of people listening are not able to vote at all, which sucks, but I won't go on that rant right now. But he was sort of saying that because a lot of people in the Bezirk elections tend to maybe give more like, oh, I'll go with this smaller party, whereas I'd vote maybe more tactically in the other one. So they're sort of thinking, Klimaliste are thinking like the Bezirksversammlung might be quite important for them. So that'll be cool. I don't think I'm going to read that 300-page thing. Maybe someone can read it to me.
That's it. They have the audiobook.
Yeah, I can do that just for hours. I can practice my German.
Not in English.
Did you want to do your news?
No, I think
Okay.
We'll wait to see what fucking bullshit happens at this stupid fascist anti-abortion march tomorrow, and then I'll give a depressing, it's still shit update next podcast.
Well, we'll look forward to that.
Woo!
Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for.
I feel exhilarated.
So do I.
Depressed, but very inspired. It's a weird and also drunk. It's a thrilling combination. Thank you so much, Izzy. That was genuinely very, very, very inspiring and informative. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much. Bye.
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 It's really bye.
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 Oh, good Lord.